started. Like I said, I'm going to leave the phones open, and you guys can just jump in. There's not too many people here, a couple others. So I've got a presentation that is really, really long that I'm not going to go through it all, which I'm sure you're happy about. But I am going to go through parts of it, and if you guys want a copy of the presentation, because there is some more detailed information in the middle part of the presentation about how to do some of the things I'm going to show you how to do, as I'm going to walk through actually creating a page on a dashboard. So if you want a copy, get a hold of Pat, and Pat can fire you off a copy so you have the content. And it's may not be the definitive reference on how to use Stratum in SharePoint, but it certainly is a good reference for that. So with that, I'm going to get started going through some of this. And just a couple of things so you guys are aware of just kind of what I'm hoping to do today is, first of all, just some fundamentals on dashboard. I'm just going to talk real briefly about this. I think when I get to our experience, you'll kind of get my take on how you should get started and what needs to be in a dashboard. And then talk a little bit about Stratum and how it can give you a real head start on this dashboard thing. And then the planning, the using Windows SharePoint Foundation, all that stuff is in the middle part of the presentation. I'm not going to go through all that stuff in detail. Instead, I'm actually going to go into a dashboard that I have, explain the components, and then show you how you would put those components up into a dashboard, into a SharePoint site to make that available to your users. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our experience with dashboard.
The caller has joined the conference.
So with that in mind, I'll just start to go through things. Hi, Teresa. One of the first things to talk about is just kind of some of the fundamentals and some of the challenges or things that we've run into. Why do people want to use dashboards? What are they trying to accomplish? And I think it covers a couple areas. One is I'd like to see it used more frequently, but it is often something management uses, whether it's a web-based dashboard or an Excel-based dashboard. We're obviously today going to talk about Stratum in a web-based environment, but it helps you monitor and gauge your progress against specific targets, or it's a great way to distribute consistently formatted information so someone has a nice place to come and get a reference, say, on their customers and see a bunch of information about their performance and their customers in one place, one easy-to-go place. They don't have to know a lot in terms of product knowledge to be able to get to things. So it's great for that kind of.
The caller has joined the conference.
The challenge with dashboards is often that they're tricky to implement because you're trying to understand the business goals and how you're going to measure yourself against some of those. If the goals are completely unattainable or they're poorly defined, that's a real challenge. So these are issues that people run into with dashboards. I think what's important is you shouldn't let these issues stop you from moving forward. This is part of the process. And part of the process, as we've found over time, needs to be get something out in front of people and start using it. What are we trying to do? They're web-based. We want them to be intuitive and flexible so you can easily make changes to them. The other part of that is, kind of one-stop shopping that I mentioned below. It's a nice organized thing. It could be collaborative in nature if you want, particularly if you're familiar with SharePoint. And the Stratum components for SharePoint will allow you to put information from Stratum in different parts of Stratum up into a dashboard. But you can also use other things. Obviously SharePoint has documents, it has libraries, it has that kind of stuff. So a lot of different things you can do up in a dashboard. And that's something that I think is important. What I'm going to show you is predominantly about Stratum. But remember, you can integrate Stratum with other information and other stuff you might have in SharePoint. So the that really the keys to successful performance dashboards are business objectives, executive sponsorship. You got to have a champion, something that someone that's gonna help you push this forward and get people to use it. And it's got to be easy to use and easy to implement. And you don't need to boil the ocean the first time around here. I think the reality is get focused on a small, focused set of things and make that happen and show people the value of getting information out to them through in a dashboard environment. The good news is that dashboards rely heavily on accurate and a stable data infrastructure, and this is, one of the big things that Stratum provides is a consistent, regularly updated, well-known, single version of the truth that people can look at and everyone knows and everyone gets the same numbers. And then the other part of that is with what we call Stratum Portal Services, which anyone that has Stratum Viewer has access to. Whether or not you have it installed is not known to me, but they don't install automatically because they're what are called web parts, and they're web parts that are a part of excuse me, that you install into a SharePoint environment. So the obvious thing that comes up is, well, Frank, we're not using SharePoint. We plan to. We hear this a lot, actually. We plan to, but we really haven't done much, and we don't have it installed or up and running yet. The good news is if you're a Stratum Viewer customer, you, by virtue of the licensing you need on the Microsoft side to run Stratum Viewer, you have all the components of SharePoint that you need to be able to start building a dashboard using Stratum and Stratum Portal Services. There's no additional licensing from Microsoft. For those of you that are familiar with this stuff, we only use the foundation component. You don't need to have any of the additional components that are a bigger licensing cost. So it's very easy to get started with Stratum and get stuff up onto a dashboard and showing things to people. So I think that's an important part of the message today is that by virtue of having Stratum Viewer, you have everything you need to get started building dashboards in Stratum. You may not have it all installed yet or using Stratum. You may not have everything installed yet, but you certainly have all the bits and pieces and access to them. So I wanted to just make you aware of that. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to, as I mentioned earlier, I'm actually going to go ahead and skip through a bunch of the slides here, and you can see there's a ton of them. And those slides that I just skipped through are slides that really go through and have some of the detail and content about how to do some of the different things that I'm going to show you instead of taking our time today to go through all the PowerPoints. I thought it would be better for me to just go through, show you some of the components in a dashboard, and then actually build a quick dashboard page for you to give you an idea how you can take advantage of the Stratum Portal Services. So before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about our experience with dashboards. And we started with dashboards a long, long time ago, and we supplied a basic HTML page that you could use as the home page in Stratum. And it was very simple and limited, but it lets you get 3 or 4 views up and displayed at one time. Didn't really easily allow for inclusion of non-Stratum information, or it didn't have anything to allow you to pass information back and forth between things. So, but it was a start. But more importantly, as we move forward with Stratum, we really discovered that some of the things that people needed to do, they want to come into a dashboard. And in fact, the one I'm going to show you shows you how you could select a customer from a drop-down list, and then everything on the dashboard changes to be specific to that customer. So, and you might do that for reps, you might do it for product brands or something like that. We realized the need for that, and then we realized you need some kind of infrastructure to allow you to not only include information from Stratum, but possibly create information from other applications you might have, other sources out on the web that you might want to reference at the same time. And that infrastructure became for us, using Stratum Viewer, the natural place to go was Microsoft SharePoint, and that's what we did. Now, for those of you that use some tool other than SharePoint, be aware you can reference our views through a straight up URL construct and display those, so you can use tools other than SharePoint. The Stratum portal services are web parts specific to SharePoint to give you some additional functionality that's pretty nice, and that's what we're going to look at here today. So always the hard part is figuring out what you want to show in a dashboard. The actual act of creating a view or a series of views and making them available in a SharePoint environment is relatively simple with Stratum. So where do you start? And I think that's one of the hardest things that people come up with. And we've always said, hey, let's just get something out there. And if you've got some standard views that show daily or monthly, like flashes, stuff like that, use those as a place to start. Something you know people look at a lot, because maybe you can combine that with a couple other informative views that give people a leg up and a simple place to go. And a really nice part of this is they go to one website, they look at it, they see 3 or 4 things, and they're done. Specific views for your brokers or your sales guys. And maybe you do have some KPIs that you're using in Stratum. It might be something as simple as sales versus a plan. Maybe you've got some delivery performance, fill rate and on-time delivery stuff that you want to see. If you've got that stuff in Stratum, it's pretty simple to do that. As you begin to put stuff up on a dashboard, I think it's important to be creative. A lot of our customers really predominantly have sales information in Stratum. If you were to go and look at our most successful customers with dashboards, they have a lot of different information because a dashboard typically spans not only sales, but it might have order counts where you want to see something like value per order, or you might have financial information or AR, so you can show like DSO and things like that. So, employee and safety counts, this is another set of information we've collected. So I think it's important to think about a lot of different information you can include in Stratum to round out your dashboard or add additional value. Another thing to consider as you put information up, you really want, one of the questions is the dashboard informational, or is it actionable? And as you think about actionable metrics, you need to remember that if you put up some kind of a margin number, the question is, and you expect people to take action on it, affect the margin, or can they affect certain parts of the margin? And you need to drive the dashboard, cascade it down to a lower level to the KPIs, and maybe what they can do is they can affect price, or they can affect build performance in the warehouse. Whatever things they can take action on and do something about are the important metrics. If there's components of a metric they can't impact, you might want to consider whether you show that to them or show that them with a list of the things they can impact. So, and this was a concept, this cascading KPIs was a concept we put in place at a certain customer that as you worked through it, it was pretty interesting to say at a high level, the area manager, which was a worldwide area, could have an impact on many, many different things. But as you drove that all the way down to the guy that runs the plant, he can't impact everything. So you had to get his dashboard to be very focused on the things he could impact and make positive progress on. So another great use of dashboards is getting information to casual or infrequent users, because this is the cool part. All they got to do is go to a web page and they can click on a tab, and they're able to see lots of stuff. Managed reporting. If I want my sales guys to focus on certain things, et cetera, they can do that. And then lastly, if you're familiar with SharePoint, using it for meetings, a great example of this is, say, sales and ops meetings, where you want to put a lot of information up in front of a group of people so they can all discuss it. That you're able to do that as well. Barriers to entry. I think this is an interesting thing because almost always we get out there and there's either no portal strategy or we don't know what we should put in the portal. Those are the two main things that we get pushback on. Another is that people just want an Excel sheet in their email or they want a report. But this barrier to entry, what should we put in the portal? I really think in no portal strategy goes back to what I was saying earlier, that by virtue of having Stratum Viewer, you do have an infrastructure that you can roll out a dashboard or a portal, and it's quite easy to do that. And then as far as what you should put in there, you could use something like Info Center, or if you know the views that people go to a lot, to begin to use those flash or some kind of frequently used view to get that out there so people have a way to see that. And you don't want to just put a single view up there. If you get 3 or 4 views, then people have it, it's a convenience item. People can go up, they can see a lot of information at one time. It becomes something that they can take advantage of pretty nicely. So it's easier than you think is kind of the message. And if you start with a focus, keep that box relatively small, you can get that going and you can go from there and build on it as your experience builds as well. Certainly, Sylvan can help with all this. As you guys know, we're doing this webinar on this, but we've got classes on how to use our SharePoint portal services that I mentioned. We've got classes on using reporting services, which is another mechanism. When we often talk about flexible information delivery, that's another way you can get information out of Stratum and other locations as well and put those results up on a dashboard if you want to have something that looks a little different than your standard viewer grid or graph. How to use Stratum within SharePoint. Those are all offerings that we have, and certainly you can contact us and we can help you out with that stuff. So any questions on that stuff while I flip over to show you guys my demo and give you a little education here? Okay, taking silence is a no. Everybody just wants to go to lunch, I'm taking it. Okay, so here you can see a dashboard that's been created in SharePoint using Stratum Web Parts. I thought what I'd do first of all is talk a little bit about who could do this. And I think what you'll see as I go through my demonstration on how to do things and how to do this, I think what I would think of as an analyst can do this stuff. You don't have to be there's no programming associated with this. There's no, you don't have to have deep skills in SharePoint or in Viewer to be able to do this. You do need to have a little bit of savvy in terms of how you work with stuff in Windows, but and in SharePoint, but not a lot. And I thought what I'd do first now is go through some of the components that are here and introduce you to them. So just in a general sense, I've come to this dashboard. It's a web page. You can see that up here at the top. And it's a SharePoint site for those of you that are familiar with SharePoint. And I have the ability, once I'm in this web page, I can drop this down. I can select a customer. It'll repaint the views so it's specific to that customer. So this, so that's a thing that I have. Perfect. Sorry about that, everybody. My bad. So these are all, each of these things that I have here, this drop down is actually a user list. So those of you that are familiar with Stratum, this is what we call our user list drop down. These things are views, there's grids and there's graphs. And so if I was to go through the components on here, I can go ahead and let's see here. I'm just going to highlight a couple of these for you. So this right here, this thing up here, that's actually what we call the user list selection or user list drop-down web part. And I'll show you how to set one of those up, but you can include this onto a web page. These other things, each of these, this here, and these down at the bottom, both of these, those are all Stratum views. So there's a view web part, amazingly enough. And what we allow you to do is connect a view web part with the drop down, at which point now they interact so I can pass, say, in a customer number, an item number, a brand, a sales rep. I can pass things back and forth, and it'll repaint the views based on what you have, what you've selected in the drop down. And another web part that we have is over here. This is actually a view group web part. So if I was to go in there and click on one of those options there, it would actually run the view for me. So that's really the three main Stratum Portal Services components or web parts that you'll want to use. Number one is the view. That's really the big thing. So, number one is the ability to create, any of these things here. So the first one is, all this stuff. So the ability to create a view. The second thing you might want to do is, number two, is this one up in the corner, and that's the ability to add into a dashboard the ability for the user to simply pick from a list and rerun all of the views or whichever ones you want to attach the list to automatically. And then the third thing that we have is the ability to go ahead and take a view group that you've defined in Stratum, so you guys are familiar with view groups, and then make that view group and the views within it available in SharePoint. So this allows you to take any set of views that you've put together and made available to a user group in Stratum, available in SharePoint. So now the user really doesn't even have to go back to Stratum. So with that said, let me just show you guys a couple other just techniques and things that exist here. So on this particular page, I've already showed you the drop down. I pick one of these guys and it reruns each of the views. Now the reality is it ran this view here, and it ran this contribution graph, and it reran the customer flash right here. It did not redo the top 80% and the top 80% brands, top 80% customers and top 80% brands, because those views aren't by customer. They're an overall view of how my top customers are doing, so I can compare this customer to those. A couple techniques in the views that I think are relevant when you're going to include a view up into a dashboard. The first thing that, I won't call this a technique, this is just a view, but these views are active. So here I'm in a standard Stratum view. I have it in SharePoint page, but if I click on this, I can drill down and see the products just like you guys are familiar with today. So the views are active, and users can come in here and see things. And so the views are active. If I just look at this view real quick, here I've included information from actual sales. I've got orders. I've got a plan. I'm not using a plan. I take that back. This average monthly, this view compares what customer is doing right now versus what they've been doing over the last 6 months. So I've taken an average over the last 6 months, and then I'm comparing how this customer and their product mix is against that. I've also got fill rate information here, on-time delivery information, that kind of thing. So I'm using traffic lights from Stratum. Those of you that have, by the way, everything I'm showing here is in 6.3 of Stratum. Some of you are probably on different versions of 6, and you can do pretty much everything I'm showing here regardless of the version of 6 that you're on. A couple other things, other techniques I used here. Obviously, I'm using traffic lighting and conditional formatting. I've also used what's hyperlinking, which I think is a great technique for dashboards. If you imagine that we've sent the user here, they're seeing this view, and he looks and he goes, boy, I want to know more about how we're doing on first choice. I can go ahead, or I've made this a clickable link. You can see my cursor is changed to a hand. I click on that, and it opens a new view and shows me, in this case, I've got the trailing 12 months of sales for that product brand for that particular customer. I've got a graph. I can see what's going on. I've got my margin. I've got a whole bunch of stuff here. I've got, what have they bought, what rebates have we given them, the cost per case, that kind of stuff, depending on what's important to you and trying to understand that customer's performance. But you can spawn these new views right off these other views, and I think that's an important technique to take advantage of when you're in a dashboard. Another thing that we can do over here, you can see I've compared actually this customer to all other customers, so hopefully you guys know about that. Here I'm looking at this particular customer, and then I'm using on the row properties, I'm using the all others, and I said that wrong. In this case, that would actually be on the columns because it's up here, but nonetheless, I'm using the all others property on the X and Y axis, or the rows and columns that's available to you. Then further to my hyperlink discussion earlier, what I was mentioning, in Stratum, this hyperlinking concept is new in version 6. But you can link to other views, as I showed when I was going through the customer review. You can also link to other applications. In this case, I've said, hey, let's Google the customer. So when the rep's here, he could come in and Google that customer. And these are made-up names, so it turns out there's not a Auburn Providers. But if there was, I get news in Google specific to that customer, so I'm able to Google that. I also mentioned up over here I could come in and look at bookings versus shipments. So there I'm using, again, just my open order. This is just a link, just like a regular view group in Stratum. It opens this up, and you can see, that's just a regular view in Stratum. So you have that ability. As I scroll down through my dashboard here, I've got obviously grid views, these two at the top. I've got graphs. The graphs are actually drillable. Conceptually, I could click on this, and it'll show me the customers for New York Foods. As I scroll down, I've also, the other thing I wanted to show was I brought in non-Stratum information here. So I've linked out to, in this case, this is our internal CRM package, so I can get directly into our CRM. Over here, of course, I did some Sylvan stuff. Here I can see what's new. Those of you that would like to participate in the version 6.3 viewer controlled release, you should let us know. The thing that's there is actually iPad access. Just a little bit of selling there. But my point is, you can have non-Stratum information on this web page along with Stratum information. So this particular dashboard has pages in it. I'm going to go to another page, so I'm going to click over. To get back where I was, I went to another page in this dashboard, and I wanted to just talk about how I think it's important that you use some different techniques in Stratum. Here you can see I've got a scorecard. This, I use more of that linking in this particular view. Here I'm looking at open orders, so you can click on open orders, and this hyperlinks out and shows me a view that this particular customer, we've got a bunch of back orders that go back as far as 4 weeks. We've got orders out 5 weeks. But now I've got the user into a view where he can see what's going on. He can see what the user, the customer has been ordering, that kind of stuff. As I go across here, here, for example, all these customers are good, but, here's a DSO, so I've linked to AR information. But this gives using hyperlinking in a dashboard gives the user access to just tons of information without having to go very far and know how to do very much. Here I am looking at my customer roundup. Here I've added a little icon. This is another version 6 thing you can do. I click on that, and this actually shows me for that customer, the customer review, and it shows me by brand, their product mix. This is a view I've shown you already, but it lets me do that. If I go out here to, say, the returns, I see that they've got, returns as a percentage of sales. This is higher than I wanted. I click on that, and this actually shows me which brands they've been returning, what are the reason codes they've been returning stuff, and I could drill down, and find, by product what they've been doing, what's been returned, that kind of thing. So, again, access to a lot of different kinds of information coming off here. Here's an example using the planning we have in Stratum. You could actually have a sales rep, if this was a sales rep's dashboard, come in here and take advantage of our planning. I could actually, I could change that number to 30,000, say yes. I can write that back to the database. So now the guy's come to a single spot. He's looking at his customers. Maybe he's making adjustments to his plan. And you could work, not here to show you all the planning techniques. You can work there. I'm working at the customer level, at the product level. So but all that allows the user to write back directly to the Stratum database and make that information available. Of course, at this point, I have not even been into Stratum. So this is one way that you can use dashboards with this drop-down, that I showed earlier with this, and I can also have view groups. Another way I could use Stratum, I'm going to show you just a slightly different view of the world. Here I've gone in and I've got I've opened Stratum and I've made the dashboard my home page in Stratum. So I've got all my view groups over here. As a user, I've got all of those, but I've also got these tabs that allow me to go and look at other things. This is a dashboard that shows me some industry news from Yahoo down at the bottom, some different sales performance year to year, both for amount and stuff, sales by month, forecast dashboard, how am I performing against my plan. And the user can click on these things. This right here is a watch list, so this is my actual, what am I trying to say? That's a view group. I've got drop downs that I can select from. This is more grids than graphs over here, but so you've got a lot of different ways you could integrate what becomes a dashboard in Stratum with Stratum. Do you want to make it the home page? Do you want people to not go into Stratum and really work from a more of an environment like this where you put view groups down the side if you want to have them be able to get to different things with links all over the place? So there's a lot of possibilities. And I thought what I would do now is kind of go through and recreate the majority of this dashboard in SharePoint to show you how it's done. And because of the time, and because this is the SharePoint or the dashboarding Insight class and not the viewer Insight class, I'm going to make the assumption you've created the view in Stratum. So I'm over here, and perfect. I'm over here, and this is my internal Stratum that all those views came from, and I apologize but I've got all of my SharePoint views in a view group down here, and I'm going to assume in our little exercise here you've already created the views that you want to place up into the new page we're going to add to this particular dashboard. So to do this, obviously you have to have administrative rights in SharePoint, but assuming you have that, this is pretty straightforward. I'm going to come in, I'm going to add a new page. So I get a dialog over here, way over on the right, that I'm going to have to scroll to. So up over here, and this is going to be my Insight example. You can see I've tried this before. I'm going to add that page. So I'm just adding a blank page right now. It takes me to that page, and you can see it breaks it up into 3 sections. This is all stuff. You could have 2 sections or 1 section, however you want to set up your SharePoint page. By the way, for those of you that are familiar with SharePoint, this is just a standard SharePoint template. Everything I'm showing you is nothing that's custom in SharePoint except for the addition of the Stratum Portal Services web parts. So I'm trying to make this as generic as possible. You don't have to have any fancy SharePoint stuff to make this happen. You can, of course, get as fancy as you want in SharePoint. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add a web part. So I tend to add these in reverse order because that's the way they get showed up on here. So if I want to add a web part that's going to show me some non-Stratum content, so I'm going to go out and maybe show the Sylvan web page. I'm going to go ahead and go to this over here in categories, media and content, and I'm just going to have a page viewer. And a page viewer simply shows you a web page, and you can key in a web page. So I'm going to add that web part. I'm going to go ahead and add that. Just go over here. You can see now that's added over here. It's not set up yet, but it's added. I'm going to add another web part here because I know I want to have a couple of views here. So I need to find the Sylvan web part. Down here at the bottom of this list, you can see Stratum Portal Services. I click on that, and here's the 4 different web parts that are available. The 3 you really care about are the view group, the view, and the user list member selection. I'm going to add a view here, so I'm just going to say add a view. So it tells us the view ID has not been set, and that's okay. We'll come back to that because I'm going to add another view. So I'm going to go ahead and add another view here. So I'm going to have 2 views on that side, And then I'm going to actually add a user list selection. If you remember, there was a drop-down box. I want to go ahead and add that. So I'm going to add that in. So that defines my left-hand side. In the center, we wanted to have a couple of views there. So I'll just add a web part in the center. I'm going to go back, add a view. So I've still got the Stratum Portal Services web parts up here, and I'm going to add a view. And I'll add one more. And then the last thing I'm going to add to it over here is I'm going to add a web part way over on the right, in this right section. I'm going to add that, and I'm actually going to add a view group. So this is where I've got that open orders view group I had. I'm going to go ahead and add that. So at this point, I basically structured my web page, but I haven't set anything up to do anything yet. And that's the next step. So I've added the web parts to the page, but now I need to go in and select and edit these web parts to select the things in Stratum that I want to display on this page. So the first thing is this is a user list, so I'm making the assumption here you guys know how to build user lists, and I've built a user list that I want to make available on this web page. So I go to edit the web part. I've just clicked on this here, go to edit the web part, and it opens a dialog, and this just opens up a selection of all the user lists you have available in Stratum. Here I'm just going to say this happens to be the user list that I have. The other part is, what do you want to display? And I'm going to display the short description, the store, and the city here for my ship to. So I'm going to do that, and then you can put a title here. The title defaults to the name of the web part. You'll see how this displays in just a minute. I'm going to call this thing, customer selection, for example. And that's going to add this web part up in the upper left. Now, in the user list web part, there's a concept of connecting it to other web parts, which is its use in our example here. So I haven't connected it to anything because I don't have anything on the page yet. So it's not going to really do anything because it's not connected to a view web part. And we're gonna now add some views to the page, and then we'll be able to go back and connect everything. So here now we selected a user list. Now I need to select some views. So I'm going to edit this web part, and I need to select a view. You can see that brought up the view selection over here on the right. These are all your views. We need to select a view, and then we need to decide whether we want to display the toolbar, the title, the logo, the view filter. Typically in SharePoint, I tend to not display anything except the view filter. But this is certainly if you want people to see your logo or the title. This is merely a look and feel and what functionality you want to provide. Now, I already said I had my views out here. I'm going to go down. I actually have a, let's see, I have, what do I have? Brand review for a salesperson. So I'm going to add that. Now, when you're adding view web parts, SharePoint seems to need a little help with the sizing of them. So I tend to size this stuff by inches. So I'm going to select inches over here. And I usually start with 5 inches depending on the view. And you can decide how you want it to look. There's some other options here. Again, here, this was, this was going to be my customer review. So I'm giving it a name. You can also, this Chrome state, you can normal, this is the borders that SharePoint places around things. You can play with this. You can have no title. You can have a title. You can have a border. You can see the options there. This is merely an aesthetic. It doesn't have any functional, impact. I'm just going to leave it the default. And you go ahead and you say OK. And you can see I've got a view in there. We're going to come back and play with that in just a minute because I want to add my other view here first. I'm going to just edit this. And I'm going to add the second view here, which was a contribution view. So it's actually a rolling contribution view. These are in alphabetical order, by the way. So it's a rolling 3-month brand contribution, I believe. Yeah, this is what I want. So this is their contribution. And again, I'm going to say the height should be, I don't know, I'm going to say 5 inches again. And I'm going to say OK. And so I must have missed something up here. This is obviously too small. Yeah, I didn't apply it. So I'm going to say, oh, I made the width 5 inches. That's interesting. I really meant to say no there. No one even caught that I was talking about height? No, is everyone just eating lunch? So here's just a simple example of a couple of views on a web page. You can see still the user list says it cannot be displayed because it's not connected. So I'm going to go up here and actually, to edit the connections, you have to be what they call editing the page in SharePoint. So I'm just editing the page. I come in, and now what you'll see is a box for connections. Which view do I want to connect these to? I'm going to connect it to the contribution, and I'm going to connect it to the customer review. So there we go. So now you can see I've got my drop down, and I can select my customers. I select the customer. It actually repaints the view for that customer. That's all there was to it. So I can continue to add my other views here. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to add, what did I have here? I had a scorecard. That's right. I'm going to go ahead and add the customer scorecard here. There's a current month scorecard. So current month scorecard for a customer. And again, that one's a little taller view. I'm actually going to make that 6 inches. But you can play with these things. This is where you kind of have to play around in SharePoint just to get the view that you want and how it looks. So I'll say OK to that, and then I'm going to add the other view. I'll just get one more in here because this is pretty repetitive. But here I'm going to add that view, which was I had a couple of pie graphs here. I'm going to add top 80%. Oops. So I go in here and under the T's, those come after the S's. So this is my top 80%. And I'll go ahead and say OK. And I probably should have made that. This one's a little bit of a smaller view, so I'm going to make this only, I'm going to make this 3 inches. And this is actually, I'm just going to call this the top customers. And that should get me that. Now, I need to add this view here to my connection. So I can do that 2 ways. I can go to this web part here like we did before. That drops down, has connections. Or I can go to this, and actually this will show me what user lists are available on my current SharePoint page. And I'm going to select this. So now I've connected all of those. You can see this is now changed to Oliveri. Now I'm not going to connect this down here because this particular graph is designed to show top customers regardless of what customer I've selected. So I've got 3 graphs or 3 views on here that are connected to my drop-down. I've got a view that's not connected to my drop-down. A couple other things I wanted to do on my web page. I wanted to have a view group here. The view group was an open order view. So I'm going to go ahead and, this is same old stuff. I'm going to edit this. I'm going to select a open order review. That was open order review. Where was that? Open order analysis. I'll give this a title. I can call this anything I want. I'll just call this, open orders. Oops. Open order, views. I'll just say OK to that. And I had one other thing that I wanted to do. This was down here at the bottom of the page. This was a non-stratum view. So here I'm going to open the tool pane, as it says, and I'm going to add a link here. And that link is going to be, I'll go to www.sylvan.com, say OK. From an appearance standpoint, I'm going to make that thing, I'll make that like 8 inches. And then, you know what, I'm going to turn off actually here I'm going to go here and I'm going to say
The caller has left the conference.
Here I'm going to say, oh, none. I'm going to have no borders, etc. So here, I'll get out of edit page mode and we'll see what my page looks like. So I've just built a page very similar to the one we were looking at previously. Has some non-Sylvine content in it. You can see here, I probably need to make this a little taller because it's cut off the graph. So this is just some fine tuning you can do. I can come over here. I'll make this like 3.5, whatever. Maybe that'll get that done. I can say okay. So I've got that. Probably should have made it a hair longer, but you guys get the idea. Here I've added a drop down. I've got I'm showing 4 different Stratum views at one time. I'm able to select a customer. I'm able to see a website that's specific, and then I can go to other views just by clicking on here. I can bring up other views that are available to me in my view groups, and I could have multiple view groups going down the side here, just like you would in Stratum. So that in a nutshell is building a dashboard in Stratum using Stratum Portal. Building a dashboard in SharePoint using Stratum Portal services, referencing both Stratum components for dropdowns, for views, for view groups, as well as some non-Stratum content as well.